Congressman Smith, thank you so much for speaking with VOA.
Thank you.
President Trump and President Xi is scheduled to meet. What issues in U.S.-China relations would you like to see raised during the meeting?
Well, I think it's extremely important that he raise human rights issues. We know there will be a discussion about North Korea, and that's very appropriate. North Korea, a rogue state, is a threat to, existential threat to South Korea and other countries in the region. But the president has to bring up in a robust way, a way that was not done during the Obama administration, issues of human rights abuse, which sadly Xi Jinping is in a race to the bottom with North Korea on subjecting his own citizens to torture, its women to forced abortion, and a whole list of gross human rights abuses, crimes against humanity. And I think the president has to be very, very clear. He needs to raise individual cases, starting off with Liu Xiaobo, who won the Nobel Peace Prize and continues to languish in prison. That is unconscionable for a world power like China to persecute and so grossly mistreat a man who believes, as do so many other Chinese, in peaceful civil rights and human rights and wants them respected. These are a matter of universally recognized human rights to which China pays lip service to and then does not follow or practice or protect.
President Trump tweeted that it's going to be a very difficult meeting in that we can no longer have massive trade deficits and job losses. Right. What's your thought on this assessment?
Well, you know, the balance of trade for last year is about $365 billion. It is all one way towards China. They export, we import. And China really would be extremely vulnerable if we were to, and I'm talking about the government, if we were to say, we're not kidding. You need to improve human rights or else your access to U.S. markets will increasingly diminish. And so, you know, it will be difficult because we've had 8 years under President Obama of kowtowing, of placating, never raising human rights in a meaningful way. You know, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton on her first trip to Beijing said that I'm not going to let human rights get in the way of promoting the sale of U.S. debt to China and global climate change. That was a terrible, terrible policy mistake by the Obama administration to take the bravest and the best and the brightest of China, who are suffering in the Laogai and other concentration camps throughout China, to throw them under the bus, and as we say here in the United States, to literally treat them with gross indifference and negligence in order to, you know, work on other issues. Human rights are at the core of what we stand for. Our Bill of Rights in the United States is one of the most hallowed of all documents that we cherish, that people have rights. It is universally recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Ahead of the Trump-Xi meeting, you and Senator Rubio announced the Free China's Hero initiative. Yes. Can you tell us more about
Yes, we have a database that we maintain, it's the best in the world, at the China Commission, of political and religious prisoners. At least 1,400 people are on that list, and there are thousands more, but they're the ones about whom we have very clear information that they are political prisoners, they are religious prisoners, and Liu Xiaobo is on that list, and he's one of the 25 that we have showcased in this list that we have raised. You know, if China really wants to be recognized and respected as an international world power, not just feared, but respected, they need to start treating their own people with respect, and they don't. Torture is endemic in China. It is routinely practiced on any political prisoner or religious prisoner. And one of the men that I met with back in 1994, Bishop Xu, Baoding Province, was horribly tortured for almost 4 decades. We don't know if he's living or alive, or dead, I should say, today. But here's a man that was, and it just is emblematic of what they do every day, crushing, torturing. The women are forced into abortions and forced sterilizations, not only killing their babies, but destroying the emotional and the psychological well-being of the entirety of women in the People's Republic of China. That needs to stop. And the president, again, is dealing with as you said, a very difficult matriculation from last year's indifference under Obama and 8 years of it to a brand new effort, which I think will be much stronger. You know, here's a case that I think tells the whole story. I chaired a hearing a couple of years ago, and we invited 5 young daughters whose fathers are being held, one has now passed away, in China and subject to torture. Grace, whose father, Gao Zhejiang, testified, as did 4 others. And what they said at the end of their testimonies, appealing to Beijing and to Washington to protect their dads, was President Obama has 2 daughters. We want to meet with him at the White House because he'll understand when we look him in the eyes and say, please, Mr. President, raise the cases of our fathers, and when you talk to Hu Jintao and then to Xi Jinping later on, it'll make a difference. You know what President Obama got back to us and said? 6 months later, after repeatedly asking for the meeting, he doesn't have the time. He had time to play golf, to have all kinds of entertainers come to the White House for playtime, but he didn't have the time to meet with the 5 daughters, which I thought was outrageous, and it was a clear indication of priorities. We've asked now President Trump to meet with the 5 daughters. I believe he will. I'm going to do another hearing with those 5 wonderful young Chinese women who got asylum here, but whose dads, again, one has passed, but the other 4 are still at great peril in China.
You have been championing the rights and freedom of Chinese people for decades. This often caused Chinese government to say this is gross interference of domestic affairs. How do you respond to that?
Well, that is a response, a default type of rhetoric that we get from dictatorships all over the world. During the worst of the days of apartheid in South Africa, the South African leadership would say, these are sovereign affairs, even though they were practicing racism in the extreme. We've heard it from the Soviet Union when they were butchering and killing using psychiatric prisons. Well, my first human rights trip in 1982 was to the Soviet Union, and the Soviet dictatorship there said, oh, these are sovereign affairs, how dare you raise it. You know, I'm the author of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. It is America's landmark law, both domestically and internationally, to protect women and other victims from the cruelty of sex and labor trafficking. China is one of the worst violators of human trafficking in the world. We're appealing now to the Trump administration to properly place them on Tier 3 and hold them to account with sanctions. There are no borders when it comes to buying and selling women across the width and breadth of China. They have turned women into commodities, and that is a horrific degrading of women and exploitation of women. On religious freedom, China has been designated a country of particular concern since the Bush administration, and yet there has not been the robust response during the 8 years of Obama. So, you know, what the Chinese government will say, these are sovereign affairs. No, they're not. When some man or woman or family wants to practice their religious belief, whether it be Falun Gong or Buddhists or Christians, they should not be persecuted by the state, because that is, again, a universally recognized human right to which they pay lip service to at the UN Human Rights Council and everywhere else. These are universally recognized human rights. There is no defense of sovereignty when it comes to those abuses.
We have now a Republican president, President Trump. How do you expect or hope to see U.S. policy toward China change as opposed to President Obama's policy?
The outrageous policy of the Obama administration of strategic patience, which meant strategic nothingness towards North Korea as they develop not only nuclear weapons, but the means of delivering them. What does strategic patience means? It means that we're going to stand back with our hands in our pockets and let them do whatever they want to do. The same goes for China. There has been a gross indifference on the part of the Obama administration. So there's a lot of catch-up that we need to do, particularly on the democracy and the human rights front, because, again, we had no policy. A bunch of little statements made here or there that amounted to a hell of beans, nothing. We need a more robust policy on human rights everywhere, including and especially towards China. The president this week, what has changed? Just denied funding to the UN Population Fund because of their support and co-management of the forced abortion policy in China. And I think the president is already changing policy to say, we stand with the oppressed women and children and men, the families of China, who the UN Population Fund has repeatedly enabled to repress through the use of forced abortion, targets quotas on how many babies will be allowed to live. The impact it's had on women's psychological health is dramatic and lifelong. And even the idea that the UN Population Fund has trained the so-called family planning cadres to be more efficient and efficacious in administering this child limitation policy. And look at the consequence in China itself. Sex-selected abortion in China now has claimed, we believe, at least 62 million missing girls.
Wow.
There's been more than that killed, but that's the differential, 62 million missing girls. So what do you do with a society that is increasingly male, with women being targeted for extermination because they're girls, and increasingly old, gray, because of a policy that is so wrong-headed and violates every norm and every, really, law on human rights protection for women and children. It has no parallel in human history. The people of China deserve to be respected by their own government. The government of China says, respect us. Sure, we'll do that. Respect your own people first.
Thank you so much, Congressman Smith. Thank you.